The jungle was dark and alive with strange sounds. Evan had been walking for hours, following a narrow trail lit only by the pale glow of the alien moon. His mission was simple: deliver trade goods to a human outpost 2 days away. But now, he was far from safe roads, deep in the wildlands where no humans stayed after nightfall. The air was thick and wet, every breath heavy with the scent of flowers and damp leaves. Somewhere far above, huge branches groaned under the weight of creatures he could not see. Evan was used to strange noises, but this time, something cut through them, a sound unlike any other. It was soft, almost too soft to hear, like a whimper at first. He thought it was his imagination, but then it came again, sharper this time, and it tugged at his heart in a way he couldn't explain. He stopped, listening carefully. The sound was coming from somewhere to his left, deep in the undergrowth. Every instinct told him not to leave the path. The villagers he passed earlier had warned him, "Don't touch the wild things here. Stranger, some will curse you before you even know it." But Evan was not the kind of man who could walk away from a cry for help. He stepped off the trail, pushing through the tall plants, his boots sinking into wet earth. The cry grew louder, more desperate. It was coming from a small hollow beneath a tangle of thorn-covered vines. He crouched down, pushing the vines aside with his gloved hands, and there it was, a small creature, curled up and trembling. Its fur was a strange silver blue, its large eyes glowing faintly in the dark. A thin trickle of blood ran from a wound on its side. The thorns had wrapped around it like a trap, cutting deeper each time it tried to move. For a long moment, Evan simply stared. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Too beautiful to be a normal animal, too fragile to survive the night. The creature made a faint sound, almost like it was calling to him. Against his better judgment, he reached forward. It didn't try to bite or run. It only shivered, watching him with those glowing eyes. Carefully, Evan took out his small knife and began cutting the vines. The thorns snagged his gloves and tore at his sleeves. When the last vine fell away, the creature let out a weak sigh. Evan lifted it gently, surprised at how light it was. Its warmth pressed against his chest. He could feel its tiny heartbeat racing back on the trail. He moved quickly. Night in this jungle was no time to be wandering. He found a small clearing and set up his camp. He placed the creature on a folded blanket near the fire. It whimpered once, but didn't try to run. Evan took out his medical kit. He cleaned the wound with water, the creature watching every movement like it understood. When he bandaged the injury, the fur around it seemed to glow faintly for a moment. He shook his head, telling himself it was just the firelight. The jungle was restless that night. Far away, Evan heard shouts and strange calls. They were not human voices. They were deep and rhythmic. Echoing through the trees, the creature's ears twitched at the sound, and it shrank closer to the fire. Evan could feel its fear. He didn't know who was out there, but he knew they were searching for something. Hours passed. Evan stayed awake, listening. The voices grew nearer, then faded away into the distance. Only then did he allow himself to relax. The creature was curled up against his side now, fast asleep. Its breathing was slow and steady. In the flickering firelight, Evan studied its features. There was something almost human in its face. He wondered what kind of life it had before he found it, and why the sound of those voices had frightened it so much. The fire burned low, and the night deepened. Evan wrapped a blanket around himself and leaned back against his pack. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. All he knew was that he had saved a helpless creature tonight. And somehow, deep inside, he felt this was only the beginning of something far bigger than he could imagine. The morning came, slowly, with pale light filtering through the thick jungle canopy. Evan woke to the sound of gentle breathing beside him. The small creature was still there, lying on the blanket. Its eyes were closed. But it no longer looked as tense as before. The wound on its side was covered neatly with the bandage he had made. Evan stretched, his muscles stiff from sleeping on the hard ground. He poured some clean water into a small cup and held it near the creature. It opened its glowing eyes and looked at him. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Then, to his surprise, the creature leaned forward and began to drink slowly. Its movements were delicate, careful, almost as if it had manners. After drinking, it curled back up, but Evan noticed something strange. The faint glow in its fur was stronger now, and when the morning sunlight touched it, the light shimmered in shifting patterns. It was like watching sunlight ripple over water. Evan frowned. He had seen many alien animals before, but nothing like this. He checked the bandage. The skin around the wound seemed different, less swollen, more healed than it should be after only one night. When he touched it gently, the glow spread under his fingertips. The creature made a soft sound, not of pain, but of comfort. It was almost as if his touch was helping it heal faster. As the morning went on, Evan prepared to pack up camp. He had a long journey to the human outpost, and staying in one place too long was dangerous. He wondered if he should release the creature here. But when he stood and slung his pack over his shoulder, the little being stood too and limped after him. It was clear it wasn't going to stay behind. "All right then," he muttered under his breath. He lifted it gently, placing it in the large side pocket of his pack where it could rest. The creature stayed quiet, its glowing eyes scanning the jungle. They walked for hours. Moving cautiously through narrow paths, the jungle seemed quieter than before. Even the usual insect hum felt distant. Evan kept glancing around, feeling watched. Around midday, they stopped near a stream. Evan knelt to refill his canteen. The creature climbed out of the pack and stood on the rocks. It looked into the water for a long time, then suddenly dipped its paw in. The glow around it spread into the stream for a few seconds. The water shimmered with silver light. Evan froze, unsure what he was seeing. When the light faded, the creature looked at him, and for the first time it made a sound like words. A single, broken syllable. "Safe." Evan blinked. He could have sworn it just spoke. But before he could ask, a sudden sound came from the jungle. Voices, low and guttural, carrying an urgent tone. The creature's ears twitched, and it darted back into the safety of his pack. Evan crouched low, scanning the shadows. Through the trees, he saw movement. Tall figures with armor made of bone and leather. They carried long spears tipped with black stone. And they were searching, methodically moving through the area. One of them stopped and bent down to touch the ground where Evan had been standing. They spoke to each other in a language Evan didn't understand, but the tone was clear. They were tracking. Evan moved quietly away from the stream, every step slow and controlled. The voices grew softer, but the danger was still close. The creature pressed against his chest through the fabric of his pack. Trembling, they kept walking until the sun began to sink again. Evan found another small clearing to rest. He set the creature down near the fire and offered it a piece of dried fruit. It sniffed it cautiously before nibbling. Evan noticed its wound had closed even more. He couldn't deny it now. This was no normal animal. Something in its body, maybe its very nature, was healing it at an impossible rate. That night, as the firelight danced across their small camp, the creature crawled closer to him. It stared into his eyes and made another sound, this time longer, softer, almost musical. He didn't understand the words, but somehow he felt the meaning. It was gratitude, pure and deep. As he lay back, staring at the stars through the gaps in the leaves, Evan's mind was restless. The jungle was full of life, but nothing like this creature. Why were those armored hunters searching for it? Why did its fur glow when he touched it? And why, despite every danger, did he feel like he had to keep it safe at all costs? He didn't know the answers, but he knew this: tomorrow, he would take the creature with him. Wherever his path led, it would not be left behind. Something told him its story was far from over, and his own life was about to change in ways he could not yet imagine. The night air was cooler than usual. Evan had built a small fire and set the creature beside it. The soft, silver-blue glow of its fur shimmered in the darkness. It was sleeping soundly, curled into a ball. Its breathing steady, Evan leaned back against a fallen log, trying to relax, but his thoughts kept circling. He had seen strange animals on alien worlds before, but nothing like this. There was something in the way it looked at him. Something in its strange behavior. He couldn't shake the feeling that it understood more than it should. The moon climbed higher, casting pale light over the camp. Evan's eyes were heavy, but a sudden movement snapped him awake. The creature stirred, lifting its head. Its glowing eyes found his, and for a long moment, they just stared at each other. Then, without warning, the glow around it grew brighter. Much brighter. Evan sat forward. The light wasn't just in the fur now, it was spilling out like mist. Swirling in the air, the creature made a sound halfway between a cry and a gasp. It staggered to its feet, its body trembling. Evan reached toward it, but stopped when the air around it began to ripple. The glow spread in waves. The shape of the creature shifting in strange, flowing patterns. Its limbs lengthened, the silver-blue fur pulling back to reveal smooth, pale skin beneath. Its face changed, the muzzle shrinking, the eyes reshaping, but still holding that strange, glowing light. The glow flared one last time, and then silence where the small creature had been moments ago. A young girl now lay on the blanket. She looked barely older than a teenager by human measure. Her silver hair spilled over her shoulders, catching the moonlight. Her skin had a faint shimmer, as if the glow from her fur still lived beneath the surface. The wound on her side was still there, wrapped in the bandage Evan had made. Evan froze. This wasn't possible. Yet she was there, breathing, trembling, and looking at him with the same glowing eyes he had seen before. She tried to speak, but the words came out broken. Not give me, she whispered. Her voice raw, her gaze darted toward the jungle, fear in every movement. Evan didn't know what to say. You were the creature, he asked, his voice low. She nodded weakly, then winced at the pain in her side. He reached for his water flask and held it to her lips. She drank slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. When she finished, she lay back, breathing hard. Evan's mind was spinning. A shapeshifter, a magical being, some alien race he had never heard of. Whatever she was, the hunters from before were after her, and now he understood why. If she could change forms, she could hide, but only if she was safe, and clearly she wasn't safe here. After a long silence, she spoke again. My name. Leora. Her words were halting, but clear enough to understand. Evan nodded slowly. I'm Evan, he said. And I'm not going to let them take you. Her lips trembled, as if she didn't know whether to believe him. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Evan sat near the fire, watching over her. Sometimes she shifted slightly, as if the transformation had left her body sore at one point. She reached out in her sleep, and her hand brushed his. A strange warmth spread through him, not just physical, but something deeper. He didn't know what it meant, but it made him even more certain that he had to protect her. By morning, she was still in her human form. Her hair caught the sunlight, shining almost white. She moved slowly. Her body clearly not fully recovered, but there was something new in her, a quiet determination. When Evan handed her a piece of fruit, she accepted it with both hands and gave a small nod. It was the first time he had seen her try to smile. As they prepared to move on, Leora stayed close to him. Every sound in the jungle made her tense. When they reached a ridge, she stopped and pointed toward the east. Her voice was soft but urgent. "They come," she said. Evan's chest tightened. Far in the distance, faint shadows moved among the trees. The hunters were still tracking them. Evan adjusted his pack, motioning for her to follow. They needed to keep moving, whatever Leora was, whoever wanted her. They weren't going to stop until they had her, and Evan knew one thing for certain: they would have to go through him. First, the jungle was heavy with silence. Even the usual hum of insects felt muted. Evan moved quickly, but carefully, guiding Leora through the narrow game trails. She stayed close, her bare feet barely making a sound on the damp ground. Every few steps, she would glance behind them, her glowing eyes sharp with fear. They had been walking for hours since sunrise. Evan had hoped the hunters would give up, but the signs were clear: snapped branches, faint footprints, the smell of smoke from distant campfires. They were still coming, and they were getting closer. "We can't just keep walking," Evan muttered. Leora tilted her head, confused. They tracked. "Scent," she said slowly, pointing to her own chest. Evan understood they weren't following him. They were following her. That meant no matter where they went, the hunters would always find them, unless they did something to throw them. Off, they reached a narrow ravine. A small stream trickled along the bottom, its banks lined with moss. Evan crouched and motioned for Leora to follow. "We walk in the water," he said. Hoping it would hide their scent, she stepped in without hesitation. The water was cold, but she didn't flinch. For nearly an hour, they followed the stream. The sound of rushing water masked their movements, but then, from somewhere ahead, a deep horn blast echoed through the jungle. Leora froze, her eyes widening. "They ahead," she whispered. Evan's stomach sank. The hunters were not only behind them, they were in front too. He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward a steep slope. The climb was rough, with loose stones and tangled roots. By the time they reached the top, both of them were breathing hard. They ducked into the thick undergrowth, hoping to stay hidden. The first hunter appeared minutes later. He was tall, his body painted with streaks of black and red. Bone armor covered his shoulders and chest. He carried a long spear that glistened in the sunlight. More hunters followed, their movements quiet but fast. They spread out, scanning the area like wolves on the hunt. Evan and Leora crouched low, barely daring to breathe, through the leaves. Evan could see one of the hunters sniff the air. He muttered something in his guttural language, and the others nodded. They were close, too close. A branch snapped under Evan's foot. The sound was small, but in the jungle silence, it was like a gunshot. One of the hunters' heads snapped toward their hiding spot. He raised his spear and called out. The others began moving in their direction. "Run," Evan whispered. Grabbing Leora's hand, they crashed through the undergrowth, branches whipping against their skin. Shouts erupted behind them, the sound of feet pounding the ground growing louder. Evan spotted a narrow gap between two large boulders and pulled Leora through. They tumbled down a hidden slope, landing hard. In a shallow pit, Leora gasped, holding her side. Evan quickly checked the old wound hadn't reopened, but she was shaken. The hunters' voices echoed above. They were searching, but hadn't found the entrance to the pit yet. Evan scanned the pit and noticed a small, dark opening at the base of the rock wall. It was barely large enough for them to crawl through. "Come on," he whispered. Leading the way, they crawled into the darkness. The air inside, damp and cold. The tunnel twisted and narrowed until it finally opened into a hidden cavern. Inside, faint blue crystals glowed along the walls, casting soft light over the space. The cavern was large enough to stand in, with a small underground stream running. Through it, for the first time in hours, Evan felt a hint of safety. Leora touched one of the glowing crystals, her eyes softening. "This safe place," she murmured. Almost to herself, they rested there for a while, listening to the muffled sounds of the hunters outside. Eventually, the noises faded. but Evan knew they weren't gone for good. "They won't stop," he said quietly. Leora looked at him, her expression unreadable. "They want me." "For ritual," she said slowly, her voice heavy. Evan frowned. What kind of ritual? Her gaze dropped and she shook her head. "You not want no." The firelight from a small torch flickered over her face. For a moment, Evan saw not just fear in her eyes, but also shame. He didn't press her for answers. Instead, he simply said, "Then I'll make sure they never get the chance." They stayed in the cavern until nightfall. When they finally emerged, the jungle was bathed in silver moonlight. They moved quietly, heading toward the distant mountains, but far behind them, a faint horn sounded again. The hunters were still coming, and Evan knew the next time they met, it would end in a fight. The mountains rose like dark giants in the distance. Evan and Leora walked along a narrow ridge, the cold wind tugging at their clothes. The jungle was far behind them now, replaced by rocky paths and scattered trees for the first time in days. There was no sign of the hunters, but Evan knew that didn't mean they were safe. They stopped near a small stream that cut through the rocks. Evan knelt to fill his canteen while Leora crouched beside him. She cupped her hands in the water, letting it run through her fingers. Her glowing eyes followed the ripples as if she was reading some secret message in them. "You like water?" Evan asked, trying to make conversation. Leora glanced at him, then gave a small nod. "Home." "Had much water," she said slowly, her voice soft. Evan smiled faintly. "Maybe one day you can show me," he said. Her lips curved just slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. They found a sheltered spot under an overhanging cliff. Evan built a small fire and set out some food. He handed her a piece of bread and dried fruit. At first, she hesitated, sniffing the bread cautiously. Then she took a bite, chewing slowly. "It good," she said. The words were simple, but Evan could hear the small warmth behind them. As they ate, Evan noticed how carefully she moved. Even the way she sat was deliberate, almost formal. It made him wonder what kind of life she had before. He found her. He wanted to ask, but he didn't want to push too hard. Instead, he handed her his old blanket. "You'll be cold tonight," he said. She looked at it for a long moment before wrapping it around herself, the way she clutched. It told him she wasn't used to being given things. When the fire burned low, they sat quietly. Evan leaned back against the rock wall. Leora sat closer than she had before, the blanket drawn tight around her. After a while, she spoke. Why save me?" Evan thought for a moment before answering. "Because you needed help," he said simply. Her gaze dropped to the ground. "Others saw me. Did nothing," she said, her voice almost breaking. Evan didn't answer right away. He knew what she meant, and he didn't need the details to understand. Later that night, as the wind howled outside their shelter, Leora shifted in her sleep, and her head rested against his arm. Evan froze, unsure if he should move, but when she sighed softly and relaxed, he stayed still. Something about that small trust felt heavier than any words she could have said. The next morning, they set out again. The climb grew steeper, and Leora stumbled more than once, each time. Evan caught her arm before she could fall. By midday, they reached a high pass overlooking a valley filled with mist. From here, the human outpost was only a day's travel. Evan pointed toward it. "Once we get there, you'll be safe," he said. But Leora's face tightened. "Safe? With humans?" she asked. "Yes," Evan replied. "They won't hurt you." She looked away, clearly unsure. That night, they camped beside a small mountain lake. The water reflected the stars so clearly it looked like the sky had fallen. Into it, Leora sat at the edge, dipping her toes in. Her silver hair shimmered in the starlight. Evan sat nearby, sharpening his knife. After a while, she turned to him. "My people say bond is life," she said. Evan looked up. What does that mean? She hesitated before answering. If someone save you. You belong together, she said softly. Evan raised an eyebrow. Belong. How? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at the water, her reflection trembling in the ripples. Many ways, she said finally. Her voice almost a whisper. They sat in silence after that, but the air between them felt different, heavier. But not in a bad way. Evan didn't fully understand what she meant. But he could feel the truth in it when they finally lay down to sleep. Evan noticed she had moved her blanket closer to his without saying a word. She didn't touch him, but the space between them was smaller than before. It was a silent choice, and it told him more than any explanation could. Far away in the mountains, a faint horn echoed through the night. Evan's eyes opened instantly. The hunters hadn't given up after all, and this time he knew the fight was coming. He looked at Leora, sleeping peacefully beside him. Whatever happened next, he wouldn't let them take her. Not now, not ever. The horn's echo faded into the mountain air. Evan rose silently, scanning the dark ridges around their camp. The stars above were sharp and cold, but the silence of the night was broken now. The hunters were close, too close. He gently shook Leora awake. Her glowing eyes opened instantly. Sensing the danger before he spoke, "They're here," he whispered. She sat up quickly. The blanket falling from her shoulders, her gaze darted toward the shadows moving on the far ridge. She didn't need to ask who it was. They moved fast. Grabbing what little they had, Evan led her along the mountain path, their boots crunching on loose stone. But the hunters had learned they didn't rush in head-on this time. Instead, dark shapes flanked them from both sides. The sound of feet on rock came from above and below. Leora's breathing quickened. "They want to trap us," she said. Evan nodded grimly. "Then we break the trap." They veered off the main trail and climbed toward a narrow ledge. It was risky. One wrong step, and they'd fall into the misty valley below. But Evan knew the hunters wouldn't expect them to take this path. They climbed quickly, the cold air burning in their lungs. A shout rang out behind them. The hunters had spotted them. Spears clattered against the rocks as they were thrown. One spear grazed Evan's arm, cutting through his jacket and drawing blood. Leora cried out, but he shook his head. "Keep going," he said. They reached a sharp bend in the ledge. Beyond it was a small plateau, a dead end. Evan cursed under his breath. They had nowhere left to run. The first hunter emerged from the shadows, his bone armor glowing faintly under the moonlight. More followed, their faces painted with dark streaks. Their leader stepped forward, a tall figure with a massive black spear. He pointed at Leora and spoke in a voice that echoed across the rocks. "She returns." Leora stepped back, fear flashing in her eyes. Evan moved in front of her, knife in hand. "She's not going anywhere with you," he said. The leader tilted his head, studying Evan like a curious animal. "You protect what is ours," the leader said slowly, his words heavy with contempt. Evan didn't answer. He lunged. The first clash was fast, his knife deflecting a spear thrust meant for his chest. The hunters moved with frightening speed, their weapons flashing in the moonlight. Evan fought fiercely, his movements fueled by pure instinct and determination. Every time one of them tried to reach Leora, he was there, blocking the way. But there were too many. One hunter knocked the knife from his hand, sending it skidding across the rocks. The leader stepped forward, raising his spear for the killing blow. Before it could strike, a flash of silver-blue light burst behind Evan. Leora had shifted into her animal form, her fur glowing like fire under the moon. With a fierce cry, she leaped at the nearest hunter, her claws raking across his armor. The glow from her body blinded them in the darkness. Evan dove for his knife, driving it into the leg of another attacker. The hunters faltered, unused to such resistance. The leader roared, swinging his spear at Leora. She dodged. But the blade grazed her shoulder. Evan's heart pounded as he charged. Tackling the leader to the ground, they struggled fiercely. The edge of the cliff only a few feet away. Evan finally wrenched the spear from his hands and hurled it into the abyss. The leader shoved him back, but before he could recover, Leora was there. She slammed into him with the force of a wild storm, sending him sprawling. The other hunters hesitated, their formation broken. Leora stood protectively in front of Evan, her glowing eyes blazing. In her own language, she shouted, something that made the hunters freeze. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the hunters stepped back. Their leader glared at Evan, then at Leora. "This is not over," he said, his voice low and dangerous. With that, they melted into the shadows, disappearing into the mountain night. Evan sank to the ground, breathing hard. Leora shifted back to her human form, kneeling beside him. "You hurt?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Just a scratch," he said with a tired smile. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she placed her hand over his. "You fight." "For me," she said softly. "Always." Evan replied without hesitation. Above them, the moon shone bright and cold. The danger wasn't gone. But for now, they had survived. And in that moment, Evan knew something. He wasn't just protecting her anymore. They were protecting each other. The first light of dawn touched the mountain peaks. Evan and Leora sat near the edge of a high ridge, looking out over the valley below. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and cold stone. Mist drifted lazily between the trees far below. The world felt quiet, almost peaceful. They had not spoken much since the battle. Both were tired, their bodies sore. But there was something more than exhaustion between them. It was the weight of everything they had been through. The chases, close calls, the moments where one had shielded the other from death. Evan glanced at her from the corner of his eye. She was watching the sunrise, her silver hair catching the light like molten frost. "We should reach the outpost by nightfall," Evan said quietly. Leora's gaze didn't move from the horizon. "You think? Safe there?" she asked. He hesitated, then nodded. "They won't hurt you," he said firmly. Her lips pressed together, as if she wanted to believe him, but wasn't sure. By midday, they were descending into the lower slopes. The path widened, and the sound of distant machinery reached Evan's ears. It was the hum of generators and towers, signs of human presence. For the first time, he let himself relax. The hunters wouldn't risk attacking so close to a human settlement. When the outpost finally came into view, Leora stopped walking. Her bare feet dug into the dirt. Evan turned to her. "What is it?" "Ha," he asked. Her eyes searched his face for a long moment before she spoke. "If I go with you, I never go back," she said softly. Evan stepped closer. "Do you want to go back?" he asked. She shook her head instantly. "Then you have your answer," he said. They entered the outpost as the sun dipped behind the hills. The small community of prefabricated buildings stood in neat rows. Humans in work clothes moved between them, carrying supplies and tools. Some stopped to stare at Leora. Her strange beauty and glowing eyes drew every gaze. Evan could hear the whispers. Who is she? Where did she come from? He led her to a small cabin near the edge of the settlement. It was simple, a cot, a table, a stove, but it was warm. Leora stepped inside slowly, looking around with quiet curiosity. "This? Yours?" she asked. "It's ours now," Evan replied. The word made her pause, her gaze softening just slightly. Over the next days, Leora adapted quickly. She learned how to cook simple meals, helped Evan with repairs, and even began speaking more in his language. At night, they would sit outside and watch the stars. She would tell him about the constellations her people named. Some of her stories were filled with wonder. others with sadness. Evan listened to them all. He never pushed her to share more than she wanted. One evening, as the air grew cooler, she handed him a small piece of crystal. It was smooth and faintly glowing, like the stones from the hidden cavern. "This, bond stone," she explained. "In my people, you give this to the one you belong with." Evan stared at it, the meaning clear. "Leora," he began, but she cut him off with a small smile. "You already mine," she said simply. And then, almost shyly, "I yours too." From that day, they were never apart. She worked beside him, laughed more often, and sometimes shifted into her animal form to play with the local children who adored her. The hunters never returned, whether because they feared the humans or because Leora's defiance had broken their claim. Evan didn't know. He only knew that every morning he woke up to find her there, curled close, her silver hair spilling over his arm. Weeks later, as they sat by the fire, Leora leaned against him and spoke softly. "When you find me, I think I die," she said. Evan looked at her. "You were stronger than you think," he said. She shook her head gently. "No. I strong because you there." He didn't answer with words. He simply pulled her closer. Outside, the night was quiet, the stars endless above them. For the first time since he'd stepped into that alien jungle, Evan truly felt at peace. The cry he had heard in the darkness so long ago had led him to danger, to fear, and to battles he had never expected. But it had also led him to her, and that, he knew, was worth everything.